started here today. Welcome back to class. Today is class 6. When we're done with today's class, we will be 2/3 of the way through the course. So I hope everybody's getting excited. I hope you guys can see the finish line, even if it might still be, even if your real test might still be a few months away. At least you can, at this point, hopefully start to picture what the finish line looks like. So we're in that home stretch now, and that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. You guys have been working really hard and starting to see those improvements, so that is great. What we're looking at today, a couple of different things. So we'll start off talking about reading comp, try to build a little bit on what we did last time. If you guys remember last time we talked a lot about the big picture type questions. Today we're going to focus on inferences, although we'll of course still see standard detail questions and big picture questions as well. We'll also take a brief look at the issue essay. We probably won't spend any more than about 20 or 25 minutes here, maybe 30 minutes at the most. And that's mainly because these essays aren't all that important. They're a little bit important, but not nearly as important as the score you get on the math and verbal sections. And then we'll take a short break, come back, and do word problems for the second half of class. So very exciting word problems, lots of fun, get to translate stuff from English into math, always exciting. So anyway, give me a smiley face if you've got your reading comp handouts in front of you. I emailed them about an hour and a half ago at this point. Okay, good. So we won't need the reading comp handouts for the first two problems we look at, but then we're going to do a couple of problems based on a slightly longer passage. And at that point, the handouts will be a little bit important. So let's dive right in and start talking about reading comp. So where we are with reading comp is really about to see inference questions. Rather than talk a whole lot about what this means, I want to give you guys a chance to work a problem and see what you come up with. So the problem that I've got is based on one of those really short passages, one of those short passages that we saw briefly last week at the end, where you really only have about 3 or 4 sentences total. And for these shorter passages, we probably don't need to do a tremendous amount of notating, but we still want to do all the good stuff that we did with the longer passages, which is trying to figure out what the big, broad picture is, what the author's main point is, what the author's attitude or tone, if there is one, is, and then how that relates to the specific question. So I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes on the first problem. That's 2 minutes to get yourself through the passage, and then another minute or so to work the question. And for some people it might be more like a minute and a half and a minute and a half, or 2 minutes, 1 minute, or 1 minute, 2 minutes. That's okay, but about 3 minutes total to get through both the passage and the question. And read that question very carefully. Here we go. Okay, we'll stop there because we now have answers from everybody in the room. Wonderful. Very good. So I've got a question for you guys. What do you think they mean when they ask you which of the following can be inferred? Any thoughts what that phrase means? What does it mean to infer something? Okay, something that's not directly stated in the passage. To some extent, I'll agree with that. Yeah. What else? What else do you guys think? How far away from the passage can it be? Okay, something that's implied. Okay, can't be global. All right. So maybe what we'll do then is we'll go through some of these answers together, and then we'll try to get an idea of precisely what they mean by the word infer on the GRE, because I think you guys are giving me pretty good definitions, generally speaking, but we want to get a really precise understanding. So what about answer choice A? In the Depression era, women were prohibited from paid work. No one picked that. Why not? Yeah, I think the word they used was discouraged. Yeah, Jane, exactly. I think they said discouraged. Let me find it. There we go. They didn't say prohibited. Okay, nobody in the class picked answer choice B. Women workers in defense were viewed more positively than women workers in traditionally female fields. Where do we see that? Yeah, it really doesn't say anything about that. I think if you really want to make the argument, you can maybe make the argument that it says that they were encouraged to work in defense industries, but that doesn't mean they were viewed more positively. They never talk about these traditional female fields, right? Maybe sort of an understanding of history might get us there, but I don't know. Okay, what about persistent and institutionalized discrimination ceased during World War II? This is the answer that 2/3 of the class picked, by the way. So where's that coming from? And notice, even though we're saying it's an inference and it might not be coming directly from the passage, we are still looking for evidence. Okay, we've got persistent and institutionalized discrimination. Okay, right there. Had discouraged women from paid work in the Depression era. The wartime government, blah, 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 blah. Okay, where does that say that discrimination ceased during World War II? Or how do you take the next step? How do you infer, where does it imply that discrimination ended during World War II? Okay, so I'm going to use those exact words. Does gender barriers were lowered somewhat mean that all discrimination ended? Okay, does pay begin to equalize? Not it became completely equal, but it began to equalize. Does that mean all discrimination ended? So C's got to be wrong as well. It's got a lot of the words that we want to see. That's how they're going to trap us sometimes. It's got a lot of the words we want to see. But generally speaking, we want to watch out for language that's too extreme. Too extreme. Now, that doesn't mean every answer that's got the word every or all is automatically wrong. But we do want to be a little bit wary when we see very extreme language like ceased. All discrimination ended, okay? Well, we better have some strong support for that in the passage, right? What about D? Nobody picked D, but tell me about it. Okay. It's first off probably absolutely incorrect, but I don't want to bring in any outside knowledge. I never want to think that way. But it's also probably incorrect even given the passage. All it said is that pay began to equalize, and then it said that shifting forces meant that fewer American women worked outside the home after World War II in 1952 rather than 1942. So if anything, the inference is that women's pay did not fully equalize with men's. So even that would be too much of a stretch. We just really have no idea what's happening after World War II. Okay, we've only got one answer left. Jane, hop on the mic. Talk to me about E. You were the one person that picked E originally.
Can you guys all hear me? Yes, yes. Okay. Yeah, I picked E because I thought that A and C could possibly be the answers, but as we went through, I thought they were just both too strong, and I didn't think that it was B or D. So E, during World War II, the U.S. government sometimes used propaganda to attempt to influence behavior. I thought that was true because it says that the wartime government used patriotic propaganda to encourage women to work in the defense industries. And while that's a really specific example of the propaganda that the government used, part E is kind of making a generalization out of that.
Yeah, but I would say that if they were truly making a generalization, then we still wouldn't be able to pick it. But are they really making a generalization? If you do something only once ever, does that mean you've sometimes done it? So we have evidence that at least once the government used propaganda to influence behavior, to encourage women to work in defense. That's the same thing as influencing behavior, encouraging, influencing. Propaganda, patriotic propaganda. So we know they did it at least once. And if they did it at least once, then we can pick an answer that says they sometimes did it. As long as we got evidence that it happened at least once, we can say sometimes it occurred. Now notice I would not feel comfortable picking answer choice E if they'd said the U.S. government often used propaganda. I don't know they often used it. I only know that they did it at least once. In other words, I only know that they did it sometimes. Don't know they did it often, but I can infer E. So what I want you guys to see from this problem is answer choice E much of an inference at all? No, not really. I mean, it's not directly stated in the passage exactly. It's a little bit farther away from the word-for-word information in the passage than perhaps a question that just said according to the passage, but it's not that big a stretch. It really isn't. Until we're able to find really good proof in the text for an answer, we don't want to pick an answer, even if they're telling us to infer something. The hardest ones of these infers require us to take two separate details and put them together to get the answer. But even then, the correct answer is not something that's simply likely to be true or probably true. The correct answer to an inference question is something that, given the information in the passage, it must be true. I cannot find any way where it would be false. Eliminate the answers that aren't guaranteed to be true based on the information in the passage. Eliminate those answers, and what's left is ideally going to be something that doesn't say a whole lot, isn't very interesting, but at the same time cannot be argued against. So that's our first takeaway here, right? We don't want to make new assumptions. We don't want to bring in our own knowledge or outside information or personal biases. We want to find the relevant fact in the passage. And I'm gonna change this up slightly because occasionally you'll get one where it's not a relevant fact, it's relevant facts. Right? So occasionally it might be two facts, but find the relevant fact or facts in the passage. Take that fact or facts and see what has to be true. Don't go anywhere beyond what must be true. So at most, flip it around. Unlike our competitor's product, ours is organic. Therefore, our competitor's product is not organic. Right? The word unlike guarantees that. Oftentimes, their correct answer is going to be fairly dumb or trivial. It won't seem to be all that big a deal at all. It will seem to be pretty mundane, let's say. But that's okay. That's what you're looking for, something that must also be true given the fact or facts in the passage. All right, questions about these inferences at all? All right, so let's take a look at another one of these. So same passage, so I'm going to give you guys a minute and a half on this one because you've already gone through the passage. Good luck on it. And just give me a check mark when you're finished. Okay, good. I've got check marks from everybody. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to assign one of these answers to each of you guys. Since this is a choose all that apply, we need to independently evaluate each of them. The answer could be any one of them, any two of them, or all three of them potentially. So Emma, I want you to take the first one, Jane the second one, Catherine the third one. If you feel it's possible to infer this, I want you to type out for me where you have evidence in the passage that allows you to draw that inference. If you don't think it's inferable, tell me it's wrong and tell me why. So we'll get all three of you guys typing at the same time. So Emma's got the first one, Jane the second, Catherine the third. Wow, I think you guys must be typing in War and Peace over there. Okay, Catherine says the third statement you can infer because of the very last sentence of the passage. Let's see. Fewer women worked outside the home between 52 and 42. Therefore, more worked in 42. I agree completely, Catherine. So Jane tells us, at first I thought this one was correct because it says despite these moves, blah, 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 it talks about shifting forces, yet never says anything at all about the men coming back. I agree 100%. It never says the men actually came back from war and took their jobs. Now, in real life, we know that that's probably true. We know that that's probably true. Yeah, the men came back and took their jobs. But it never says that, right? Even this thing about merely filling in for some soldier doesn't lead us to be able to infer something about a causality. Notice that word caused. We need a lot of evidence before we can say one thing caused another. All right, and last one, working backwards here, Emma said that this one is not inferable. It says women worked outside the home less, but maybe not because of discrimination. Yeah, maybe it had nothing to do with discrimination. Maybe it was social pressures. Maybe it was all sorts of things that could be unrelated to job discrimination. Unrelated to job discrimination. Now, we might still argue that social pressures might be a form of discrimination, but it's not discrimination in the workplace, right? So I agree with you guys 100%. The only one we can infer is the third one. So very good job on that, guys, and really good explanations as well for the three, for each of you, for the one that you took. Well done. Questions at all? All right, so notice how dumb the last one is. We're basically saying X went down from this year to that year. What can we infer? X used to be higher. That's dumb. That's stupid. But it's a GRE reading comp style inference. It's a GRE reading comp style inference. It's not the type of inference that's going to get you a great job. It's not the type of inference that's going to cement your academic career, but it is the type of sort of think inside the box, read very carefully inference that the GRE loves to test us on. Okay, so our next sort of takeaway here is that on these inference questions, oftentimes the answers that someone would assume is probably true, oftentimes that's a trap answer. So in our example here, the second one, cause many men to come back home and take back jobs they had once held. That makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's probably true historically, but that's a trap answer because there's nothing in the passage that talks about the men returning from World War II. So we have to only pick the choices that can't be wrong. Right? It doesn't really even matter if they say a really cool inference or come up with something incredibly, intelligent. What matters is you can't argue against them. They can't be wrong. Okay, so we're going to switch over now and deal with a longer practice passage. So hopefully you guys remember this from last week. Liz went over this with you. The idea that on these longer passages, we want to keep some notes that are going to help us try to pick apart the main idea of the passage, the general information in the passage. That's really important. That's a skill we want to get good at. And, we've got this marked as read for detail and make more detailed notes and aim for a higher amount of comprehension. And we've got it right here on the first paragraph. But in reality, where we want to do the more reading is whatever part of the passage is the more general, broad, here's the author's opinion. That might be the start of the second paragraph, or it might be the last part of the last paragraph. But the point is, find that part of the passage. And by the way, it might also be the first paragraph, but find that part of the passage that really, really, really gives you the big picture author, main point, primary purpose, attitude or tone information, and read that part really carefully. And for the rest of the passage, just try to get the gist of it. What's the topic? What's the headline? What's this paragraph about? I'm not going to memorize the details. I just want to know what it's about so I know where to go look later on if I get a very detail-oriented question. And we talked about this last time as well, which is where's the main idea? And it could be in a lot of different places, but one fairly common thing they do is they put a twist in. They put a twist in and they have language that indicates a twist is coming. For a long time, X believed in blah, blah, blah. Well, I bet paragraph 2 is going to tell me how they were wrong all along, and now we've got a new understanding or a new hypothesis or something. Language like that, and there's every time you find one of these, you can point to the specific language that clued it in. On the other hand, it's harder to ahead of time say, here is how they will write it, because the English language is very flexible. But look for that language that establishes that there's a twist coming up, or there's something new, something interesting, something going against what came before. When you see that, that really helps you understand the passage as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to be there, but that's a tendency that occurs enough to be aware of it. All right, stop me now before we do this passage. Any questions? Okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We are going to do the passage called the Keene passage. And if you guys got that email from me, it's the PDF that's just called GRE Class 6 Reading Comp Keene passage. It's a relatively short passage. There's shorters out there, but there's also longer ones out there. But it's a relatively short passage. But what I want you guys to do is do your standard diagram. And when we're done, we want to really have a good idea what the big picture stuff is. Main point, primary purpose, the headline for each paragraph. So give me a smiley face if you got that passage in front of you. Wonderful. 2 minutes to read it, and then we'll talk about it. Good luck. Whoops, I hit the wrong button there. Okay, give me a check mark if you're done with the passage, and a red X if you're not. Okay, it looks like we're basically done with this, so let's talk about it. What do you guys think about that passage, just first impressions? Not anything specific about it, but just first impressions. Did you enjoy it? Did you learn a lot about this Irish woman? Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story, right? Kind of an interesting story here. Yeah. Let's talk about paragraph one. I want to know the topic for paragraph one. I want a big, bold topic sentence here. How would you guys describe the first paragraph? Anybody want to hop on the mic and tell me what you wrote down on your paper or how you would summarize this? Okay, so the background on the poem. So we've got this. Tell me about the poem. Give me like 5 or 6 words real quick that just summarize what the poem was. Why it was constructed. Give me, I don't want a lot of detail, but just enough. What is it? What is this poem? You guys are being super general. That's good. I want to know the general stuff, but okay. So husband killed Dark Eileen, composed this Keen, which was a poem. Okay. All right. What else did we learn in that first paragraph, right? What else did we learn? Okay, so yeah, I'd agree with that. It's read at his wake, or chanted, right? Certain elements, I like that, elements typical of the Keens of the day, whatever that might be. Okay, I'll buy that. So this might be what our notes look like, right? The husband gets killed, Dark Eileen. Okay, I'll add that. I'd agree with that, right? Not written down till later. Yeah. So basically we got this woman, her husband got murdered or killed, depending on whether you're Irish or English, I would suppose, is how you would view the death of Dark Eileen's husband. She composed this Keen. She read it at his wake or chanted it or something. There are certain elements in there, right? Traditional elements typical of Keens, and they didn't write it down right away, right? We've got this evidence that complete versions were not written down until years later. Okay, great. Now, if they ask me about the certain elements that are typical of the Keens, where am I going to go find that? Yeah, and there's a whole list of things that they include, right? Restricted line length, aperiodic repetition, blah, 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 right? The point I want to make here is I don't want to try to memorize that at all. A, I'm probably going to fail. B, it's a waste of time. Even if I'm able to do that successfully, it might be a waste of time because there's every chance that there's not going to be a question about those elements. So I don't want to memorize those elements. I just want to know where they are. And if they ask me about them, I'm not going to use my memory. I'm going to go immediately back to that part of the passage, and I'm going to read that part of the passage very carefully, and then I'm going to pick the answer that agrees with what's in the passage. It really is that simple. When people miss reading comp, they miss it because they make it harder than it needs to be, or they just can't read. That's the other option, but I don't think that applies to you guys at all. I think if you guys are going to miss reading comp, you're going to miss it mostly because you overthink it or make it harder than it actually is. And that's not me insulting you guys. That's just commonly the trap people fall into. They make it harder than it needs to be. Okay, talk to me about the second paragraph. What's happening in the second paragraph? Okay, we're talking about the wake. and how this poem fit into the wake. So the wake and this keen at the wake. But give me more, because I think we're missing something there. Yeah. What else is there that seems really important? It's the wake, of course, and we've got all this stuff about what's in the wake, but what else is in there that's really important? Okay, the wake versus, yeah, I think that is the real key to catch on to here, versus Christian funerals. That's important. That's where the big picture stuff's going to come. So what was different about the wake versus Christian funerals? So we get themes of grief and rage in the keen. What else do we get? Now, did the author call it barbaric practices? Is that important that I'm being nitpicky about that? It might be. We don't want to read too much into it. Right? Drinking husband's blood is, I think, probably where we're going with that for the seemingly barbaric practices. We just want to make sure that we don't say more than the passage actually says. Okay. Other thoughts? So if it's the wake versus the Christian funerals, and the wake was all about grief or, wow, I cannot spell, not grief of range, grief or rage in the keen, what did we find out about Christian funerals? Anything? Maybe not. Maybe they're just contrasting it with the Christian funerals. Yeah, maybe forgiveness is there. Okay. Well, I think we've got enough. Do you guys feel like we've got enough to answer the questions here? Feel like you understand it well enough? Maybe we don't remember every detail, but I don't want you to remember every detail. Just want you to know which paragraph to go back to. It's that simple, right? So what do you guys think the main point of this passage ends up being? Before we look at any questions, just tell me, why did the author write this? What is the author trying to tell us? Just one nice and easy general sentence. What's the author trying to talk to us about? What's the main point? Any ideas? Okay, I'll buy that. The main point is the primary purpose is to inform us about this poem. Okay, Catherine's saying the main point is something about a work which contains unexpected elements. Are those elements really unexpected, though? Maybe unexpected to us. Maybe unexpected to us, right? But I think we need to be careful because it said that it was a very traditional keen, right? It was very traditional in a lot of ways. So it wasn't necessarily unexpected for the people that were likely to be at the wake, maybe. I don't know. Anything else? Okay, well, let's try a question out then. I'll give you guys a minute to work your way through question number 1. Good luck. Okay, you guys have all hovered around the same answer, which is B, describe a work of art and its social function. I love it. Good job, guys. That is totally correct. The only thing I want to show you is that even when you get these big, broad, primary purpose, main point type questions, you're able to, if the answer is correct, translate the general terms back into the specific terms of the passage. So what is the work of art? And what is the social function? Yeah, and I think they're using the word function not as in a social event, but as in the purpose of it. So I'd agree it's the wake, but it's more that it's used at the wake as its function. I'm being super nitpicky here, guys, so ignore me to some extent. But absolutely. So what I want to point out to you guys is even a big, broad, general question, there is still textual support for it in the passage. We should be able to translate the answers back to what was actually talked about in the passage. And if we can't, it's wrong. So one of the things that's often wrong in questions like this are answers that are too big or too small. So give me an answer that was too big, it was broader than the actual passage. The development of a resistance movement, way out of scope of the passage. That's not too broad, though. That's more like, where the hell did that come from? Right? What else? I don't know. I think, okay, Jay and I agree with, right? We have the role of women channeling uncomfortable emotional themes. We only have one tiny example. We're not delineating the role entirely. I would say, on the other hand, though, that D is too narrow, because what is D? If we translate it to the passage, where is D? Right, it's just one part of the second paragraph. So I wouldn't say D is too broad, because they don't say contrast all religious traditions. They say two religious traditions, and so we can translate that as contrast the keen and the wake. The wake and the funeral, as expressed through ceremony, right? So wake and funeral is the ceremony. The religious traditions, I guess, are Christian and non-Christian. So it's actually very specific. It's just it's too narrow because it ignores everything that's in the first paragraph. And A is also way too narrow. It's one small part of one of the paragraphs. But B is nice and broad because describe a work of art is which paragraph? Which paragraph is where we describe the keen? Oh, I would agree with Catherine. Where we describe the keen is paragraph 1 and a little bit of paragraph 2 at the end. So I'll agree with both of you. Paragraph 1, they tell us about all the traditional elements and why Dr. Eileen wrote it. Paragraph 2, they tell us the contents of it a little more. Where do we get its social function? So that answer covers everything in the passage. It's the right size. And that's the real takeaway from these problems. And sorry to belabor the point on a problem that you guys all got correct. But I really want to make sure that we can apply this to future problems, that we need an answer that covers all of the passage without going too far. If there's a twist in the passage, we should take that into account. All of that's really important if we're going to pick the correct answer for this particular problem. Okay, let's try another one. I'm going to give you longer on this one. I'm going to give you a full 2 minutes because it's an accept question. So here we go, 2 minutes. Good luck. All right, we actually got 3 different answers for this one. Very interesting. Very interesting. So the reason I gave you guys 2 minutes is because these questions are designed to take longer. In other words, when we get a standard just find a detail in the passage, we need to find one detail in the passage and pick the answer that says the same thing. But in this case, they're asking us which of the following is not described in the passage. Well, it's really hard to know whether something's not in the passage. So the way we want to approach it is to go back and treat every answer like it's something we have to find in the passage. In other words, I want 4 of these answers. I want to find them directly in the passage. Okay, so nobody picked B and E. So I want you guys to tell me, first off, where in the passage we should go to reread, given that it's asking about the Keen's aesthetic qualities. And then Emma, you tell me where you found B, and Jane, you tell me where you found E. Okay, I agree. It's 10 to 14 for the aesthetic qualities. So where do we get the repeated at irregular intervals, and where do we get lines generally short in length? Right, Emma's saying line 10. Let's read that. Restricted line length. Okay, that kills E. All right, where do we get certain elements are repeated? Aperiodic repetition, that's there. Okay, of these remaining three answers, two of them are there. Tell me, where are they? And they've got to be in that section about aesthetic qualities. Tell me where two of these other three answers are found. Final vowel harmony for A. Some vowels relate to each other in a pleasantly musical way. Does harmony mean pleasantly musical? Can you say harmony is the same as pleasantly musical? Is that a good synonym? Paraphrase. Because if it is, A is wrong. If it's not, A might be the correct answer. What does the word harmony mean, guys? And in the meantime, Catherine's telling me C is in line. Okay, let me look at line 11 here. Direct address of the deceased person. Deceased is the same as dead. Direct address is the same as speaks directly. Absolutely. So we're down to DNA. All I want to know is pleasantly musical the same thing as harmony? Okay, well, if A is the right answer, then you got to tell me where D is. Okay, tell me. Tell me where. Line 22. Let's read that. Line 22. Teens express not only love for the fallen, but uncomfortable themes of grief, rage, and revenge. Okay, agree with you 100%, but it's not about aesthetics. Jane is totally correct. That's not the aesthetic qualities. That's the emotional qualities. They never said the word aesthetic anywhere near there. D has to be the answer. And yes, if we define the word harmony, maybe the exact definition isn't pleasantly musical, but it's actually really close. Harmony means going together well in music, right? Working together well, especially musically. So A is in there. Harmony, vowel harmony is really the same as vowels relate to each other pleasantly. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's not that much of a stretch. D's in the wrong paragraph. If the question's about paragraph 1, the answer is in paragraph 1. If we go find it somewhere else, we're probably overreaching. All right, what do you guys think about that one? I noticed the trap they placed in there, right? The correct answer was in the passage. It just wasn't in the right place. It wasn't in the aesthetics portion. Yeah, definitely. But what you want to do is don't overthink it once again. The takeaway here is to slow yourself down a little bit and just expect that these questions will take a little bit longer, because you're going to need to find ways to eliminate 4 of the 5 answers because they're in the passage, right? And so you got to find 4 of them in the passage, and not just in the passage, but in the part of the passage the question's asking about. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going. We get a vocab type question. I'll give you guys a minute for this one. Good luck. And we'll switch to check marks when you're done for this one, because you can select more than one. Okay, time is up. I've got check marks from everybody. Wonderful. Okay, so when they give us a line number, what should we do? Keeping in mind Ian's new argument that we don't want to overthink things. Just go to that line and reread it. So let's do that. Complete versions were not written until years later. Okay? So what do you think they mean by versions here? Once again, we don't want to overread this. Can we state that the Keen was incomplete until written down? Why not, Jane? Didn't they say complete versions were not written down until years later? Maybe, yeah. Can something be complete even if it's not completely written down? Yeah, there we go. I think Catherine and Jane have the right idea there if we put their two comments together. I think you're totally right. The poem that Dark Eileen chanted at her husband's wake was complete. She didn't give an incomplete poem. It just didn't get fully written down till later. Okay. Does the word version reinforce the poetic nature of the Keen? Does version have anything to do with poetic nature? What do you guys think? Do we get poetic nature from versions? Okay. But Catherine, I'd argue that's bringing in your own bias about something that changes is poetic. I mean, we'd have to even define what poetic means. So all we're left with is not all copies are identical. What does the word version in real life actually mean? If I say there are 6 versions of the Keen written down, what am I really saying? Yep. And so the takeaway here is stick to the sentence in which the word appears and be very literal. What does the word mean? Probably what it always means, right? Probably what it always means. This is where things diverge a little bit from the SAT. So if you guys have remember taking the SAT, and the SAT does those vocab and context questions a lot more, you probably remember that in most cases on the SAT, they'll use a word that has 5 different dictionary meanings, and they'll give you all 5 of those as answers, and you've got to figure out what it actually means in this case. The GRE doesn't tend to do that as much. They test vocabulary in other ways. So they're really just saying, can you read it contextually? But if a word has multiple meanings, make sure you're selecting the right one. But don't all of a sudden go out on a limb and talk about poetic nature or incomplete or things like that. Don't over-infer. That's the real lesson there. Okay, here we go. Another question, 1 minute. Well, I'll give you a minute and a half. This one's a little bit longer. Good luck. Okay, so they're asking us to infer something, but they're asking us to infer something about the ideals of forgiveness and otherworldly hope. What should I do if they're asking me to infer something about these ideals? Remember, this is the keep it simple day. How? Tell me exactly what the first thing I should do is. Don't be vague. Yes, reread that sentence. I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I just want to drill this in as much as possible. They tell me line 23, let me go reread that. So let's do that. So it says, Keynes expressed not only love, but uncomfortable themes of blah, 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 in contrast to the ideals of forgiveness and otherworldly hope manifested at the funeral. So it seems like what they're doing is they're contrasting the wake, right, versus the funeral. The wake versus the funeral. And these ideals of forgiveness and otherworldly hope end up being part of the funeral stuff, right? This is the funeral. Okay, so if we're contrasting the wake versus the funeral, let's read one more sentence. Tell me one more sentence I should read that gives me the answer that I can infer. What do you think, Catherine? Okay, I'm going to go one sentence above. As opposed to the funeral, the wake was non-Christian. Okay, so now I know that the wake was non-Christian. Okay, I agree with you. Well, if the wake is non-Christian, then what's the funeral? And if the funeral is Christian, then what are the ideals of forgiveness and otherworldly hope? And that's answer choice A. So good job, guys. Very good job on this one. This is a tough question, but notice that the inference that we drew is not stated directly in the passage. It comes from two separate facts that we put together. But the two facts are really straightforward. We're saying A versus B. And then we say A is one thing, therefore B is the other. That's it. That's all we're doing here. It's not clever thinking. It's not creative thinking. It's careful, precise thinking. That's what this is all about. All right, good job on that. Any of those other answers that gave you guys a little bit of trouble, or should we move on? Okay. So remember, we're not making new assumptions. At most, we're flipping that fact. As opposed to the funeral, the wake was non-Christian. That means the funeral was Christian. If the funeral was Christian, then all the things that happened at the funeral, we can infer, had Christian elements to them, let's say. Well done. All right, I've got one more question for you guys to do. One more question, and then we will move on. Here we go. All right. Let me show you guys what everybody picked. Everybody picked E. So Emma, tell me about E. Why did you choose E in the end? Tell me where you came from with that one. Because wasn't it barbaric? Yeah, the tone of the last few sentences were quite normal. This is an academic author describing something in a very neutral way. Not really much in the terms of emotions. I agree with you 100%. And I think the key phrase is seemingly barbaric. In other words, it might be seemingly barbaric to us, but that doesn't mean it's actually barbaric as far as the author is concerned, right? It seems to be barbaric, but the author's not saying it actually is. And that's the takeaway here. And by the way, E was totally correct, so good job, guys. Very good job on that. The authors aren't really going to ever be too emotional. Because it's generally academic or scholarly writing, we're looking for things like objective, tolerant, analytical, scholarly. We don't want to see strong language. The only thing I'd add to this is occasionally you'll get an author's passage that is not strictly neutral, that is supporting one side or the other. But in that case, it's still not going to be repugnance. It's going to be something like general acceptance with some reservations, right? That's the type of answer that we're looking for. Even if the author is pro whatever the subject is, it's not going to be love it. It's going to be like general acceptance with some reservations. Or if the author dislikes something, if the author's against it, it might be qualified disapproval. Right? In other words, it's not going to be like I hate it. It's going to be a little bit good or a little bit bad. That's the kind of answers you're looking for. But on the GRE especially, most of the passages end up being pretty academic writing, pretty much scholarly, and so they're not really even as strong as general acceptance or qualified disapproval. But you're essentially never going to pick, ever, you're never going to see a passage where repugnance is a correct answer or lamentable grief is a correct answer. It's just not going to happen on a test like the GRE. Okay, well done. So our takeaways here are, I think, a couple. Number one, get the big picture from the passage. That's what Liz talked to you guys a lot about last week, but I talked to you guys a little bit this week. Get the big picture out of the way, and then know where the details are located. Don't bother knowing the details. Know where they're located. That's our general takeaway for all reading comp. But more specifically, what we learned today is don't overthink stuff. Don't overthink stuff. Just find the proof in the passage. Find the proof in the passage. Find the answer that matches that. Maybe it's using paraphrasing. Maybe it's drawing an implication from it. But only pick the answer that you can prove. And the other answers, even if they make sense or appeal to your better instincts, no. It's got to say it somewhere in the passage. There's got to be proof before we can pick it. And as long as we turn this into a matching game, right? Match the answer with the evidence in the passage that says that. This is way easier than any sort of creative thinking sort of test. It's just that we're more used to being tested on our ability to read something and synthesize it and understand it and make creative inferences. That's what they want you to do in college and in grad school. This is not. This is like, do you guys ever do those like word jumbles? That's what this is, or where you like word finds where you have to circle the word hidden in amongst all the other letters. You're not doing crossword puzzles here. You're doing the word find, right? That's really what you're doing on this kind of a test. Not really super high level creative thinking, but low level matching. That's what you're doing. I know that sounds horrible, but that's what this test is about, at least with reading comp. Okay, I've talked far too long about reading comp. I want to switch over to the essays now for about 15 to 20 minutes. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions? I think you guys did great on the reading comp, actually. But do you have any questions at all? Wonderful. All right, let us talk about the essays. So the essays on the GRE, you're going to get 2 essays. Each you're going to have 30 minutes for, non-cumulative. So if you do the issue essay in 20 minutes, that doesn't mean you get 40 on the argument essay. You get 30 minutes each. The 2 topics are actually very, very different tasks. The issue essay and the argument essay, they're very different tasks. And we'll talk about the argument essay next week. But today we're going to talk about the issue essay. And we need to be really clear what our job is, because one of the easiest ways to get a low score on the essay is to misinterpret or not stick very closely to the task that they give you. I think the most important point on this slide is the essays do not factor into your 130 to 170 math and verbal scores. They don't. They're scored separately. And the way they score them is they have 2 people read each of your essays. So you get a total of 4 scores from 0 to 6. And then they just average them and round up to the nearest half point. So that's really it. As far as the schools are concerned, they don't care much about the essays for the most part. Most of the schools are going to care a lot more about your personal statement or research statement or statement of purpose. Depending on what kind of program you are, they have different names for those types of essays. But they're going to care a lot more about those essays that you write. If you're going to use your GRE score to apply to business school, the business schools are going to make you write 3, 4, maybe even 5 separate essays. They're going to care a lot more about your application essays than these silly little essays that you wrote in half an hour on the day of the test. That being said, these essays sort of serve as a backup. So for instance, if you got a 0 on the essay or a 1 on the essay, and yet you submitted a really good application essay, the admissions people are going to wonder what's wrong with you. They're going to wonder if you cheated. In other words, if you hired somebody to write your application essay, which, by the way, sadly enough, some people do. So it's kind of a double check for them at one level. At another level, there are programs out there that actually are going to care a little about your essay. So if you're applying to, say, a creative writing program or a journalism program, they might care a little bit more about the essays than a program in engineering or nursing or even business might care about, right? So keep that in mind. Okay, so I've just spent 2 minutes telling you guys that these essays aren't all that important, but now we'll spend a couple of minutes seeing how to do them. Because still, even if they're not super important, we want to get a decent enough score so that the admissions people don't worry about us at all. So the issue essay is basically giving us an issue and asking us to take a side, and this is really important. If all you do is deconstruct it and stay really wishy-washy on it, then you're not following their instructions. We need to pick a side and say, this is what I believe, and I'm going to support it with this evidence. That being said, we want to recognize that it's a complex issue. That doesn't mean we're going to equivocate, but it does mean that we can describe why someone else might believe the opposite and then describe why they're actually wrong. So in other words, it's not simply, I believe X, nah. It's, I believe X, and here's why. Other people might believe the opposite of X, and I can see where they're coming from, but they've failed to consider this important piece of information. In other words, we're still strongly on one of the two sides, but we're acknowledging that the other side exists. And in an ideal world, attacking the other side. So 3 big steps. Take a point of view, support that point of view using relevant and specific examples, and then make sure that you're going to get all of the instructions referenced in the task. And I'll show you guys what that looks like in just a second. But in other words, number 3 means follow the instructions. It doesn't matter if you write a brilliant essay. If you write a brilliant essay that's not what they told you to do, you're going to get a low score. So we definitely want to follow their instructions carefully. Back to number 2 for a second. Liz and I read a lot of essays, and I'll tell you the 2 biggest problems I typically run into with essay writing have to do with number 2. I sometimes see essays where the examples are all very abstract or general. That's not nearly as strong as a very specific example. So in other words, if I want to prove that freedom of religion is the most important civil right in the Bill of Rights, I don't want to say freedom of religion is good because it allows people to worship whatever they want. That's too general. I want to give a specific, concrete example of how freedom of religion is a positive thing. I don't know why I'm coming up with that example, but just to point out that we want to be really specific, not vague, general, and abstract. The other thing is relevance. I read a lot of essays where I'm sure that the example that the writer chose was relevant to them, but it's not clear why it's relevant to me. So if you use an example, you also have to include information in that paragraph that both describes the example and describes why that example is relevant. And by relevant, I mean supports your point of view. So that can just be an additional sentence. But I get all these passages where, I get all these essays where I read it and I'm like, why did this person bring up Mahatma Gandhi That doesn't seem to have anything to do with the topic. And the reason why is it made perfect sense to them, but it didn't make sense to me because I'm not in their head. So you have to have that sentence that says, so Mahatma Gandhi is a great example of X because, and then really lay it out very clearly, explain it to us. So the interesting thing about these essays is the instructions can vary. They don't vary a lot, but there's about 6 different ways that they write the instructions. So for instance, here's the first version. Write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the claim. In developing and supporting your position, be sure to address the most compelling reasons and or examples that could be used to challenge your position. So that means we're going to write an essay where we point out what the best opposing evidence is and then explain why that is not good. So in other words, we might have an essay about topic A. We might say, I agree with topic A. Some people might propose that, X, Y, Z are good counters to my belief, but they're wrong, and here's why. Does that make sense to everybody, what this instruction actually is asking you to do? And if we just wrote an essay and didn't include the second part here, we would get a lower score, even if the rest of the essay was really good. So here's another version. Write a response in which you discuss your views on the policy and explain your reasoning for the position you take. In developing and supporting your position, you should consider the possible consequences of implementing the policy and explain how these shape your position. So in this case, we might say, I disagree with this policy, and I think we should not implement the policy, and here's what's going to happen if we don't or do implement the policy, and here's why those consequences make me say we shouldn't adopt it, right? So just follow the instructions really carefully, and as long as you do that and write halfway decent, you'll get a pretty good score. Questions at all? So let's see an example and let's practice a little bit. In our time, here's the prompt. In our time, specialists of all kinds are highly overrated. We need more generalists, people who can provide broad perspectives. So notice what they're telling us to do in the task. Do we agree or disagree with the statement? Okay? And then we should consider ways in which the statement might or might not hold true. Interesting. So they're asking us not just to agree or disagree with this prompt, but we also need to consider ways in which it may or may not be true. So maybe specific situations in which it may be true or may not be true. And then we need to tell them how those considerations shaped our agreement, our eventual agreement or disagreement. That's not going to be a hard barrier to cross. We can come up with a couple of specific examples for both sides probably, and whichever side we end up picking, it won't be problematic to show why our example, shows a way that the statement might or might not be true. It's not a big deal, but it's something we want to be aware of. We want to craft our examples, craft our essays to do what they're asking us to do. So let's go ahead and try this. I want at least 2 very specific, very relevant examples for both sides. So the support would be, we need more generalists. And the against would be, no, we don't need more generalists. So give me some very specific examples of we need more generalists. Come on, guys, brainstorm this out. What examples could we come up with to support? Okay. Okay, and I like this because both Catherine and Emma have given me examples that are very specific. So psychology, right? You need someone that are generally about, mental health, not just about one specific problem. Because people, and then we want to go ahead and talk about this and talk about how people don't just suffer from one problem or another. We need someone that's able to see, it's generalized enough to be able to see all of the issues that somebody's facing. And then Emma, okay, example could be a kidney specialist versus lack of GPs. Is that for or against, though? Do we want kidney specialists or do we want more general practitioners? So you can't, that's an example of general versus specific, but I don't know which side you're on yet until you give me more about why one is bad. Does that make sense? Okay, tell me why. Want more GP docs, right? Why? What's good about that? And by the way, we have two separate examples so far that are medically related. I'd probably do one of the two, but not both. So I want a third one that's not about medicine. What do you guys have for me? Any more examples? Something non-medical? Emma, why do we want more GP doctors? Okay, so illness related to, many little things rather than like one organ. Okay, I'll buy that. I mean, you still want the kidney specialist once you find out that you've got kidney problems. But I agree with you. A lot of stuff isn't one specific organ. It's a more generalized thing. Okay. So Catherine's saying in research we can test hypotheses for very specific things. However, if we don't have the generalist, I love it, right? The generalist makes scientific info relevant. Okay, and then we would want to give, so my only objection, Catherine, is that this is still a little bit too abstract. I would love a specific example from real life of where a generalist took the specific research and turned it into something useful for everyone. Okay, neuropsychology. Yeah, all right, I'll buy that. I don't know a lot about neuropsychology, but I think I see where you're going with this. Point is, I'm not willing psychology. I'm not willing to talk about that unless I know how to make it relevant and specific. Okay, good job. I'm a little bit worried that we're still kind of in the same general sphere of influence, but that's okay. I'd probably, if I was going to go with this, I'd probably do the neuropsychology and then maybe the GP, because then we get science and health, and we get psychology and medical health, and we don't have two that are just health, and we don't have two that are just psychology. But whatever, there's different ways to approach that. So give me the against. Tell me why we want more specialists, or why generalists we don't want. It could go either way. Come on, I want at least two good examples against this. Jane, what do you think? I'm not getting much from you in terms of examples. Generalists can miss important factors because they do not have the full information. Okay, so that's the argument. Generalists can miss important things because they don't know enough about each thing. And then the example you're using is GP missing a heart palpitation. Okay, I'll buy it. Okay. That's a cool example, Emma. So we have building managers, and I guess sort of the, probably not managers, but maybe the general contractor, right? The general contractor, or the architect maybe, versus the actual bricklayer Just because you know where it should go doesn't mean you know how to do it. You still need that specialist to come in and actually lay the bricks. I like that example. I think that's a cool example. So yeah, well done on that. Very well done. So let's stop there. Unless anybody's got another one to add real quick. And the next question I have for you guys is, which side do you pick? Do you pick the side you agree about? Oh, that's a good one. So, right, anthropologists specializing in a specific culture, and you've got to specialize in it because otherwise you'll never be able to put in the time it takes to truly learn about that culture. Yeah, I'd agree with that. That's a good one. Very good one. Okay, so you guys tell me, what do you think? Which side are we going to pick in this, and why? Does it even matter which side we pick? Come on, guys. What is it? What side are we picking? Doesn't matter. How do you decide which side to pick? It's a really simple answer. Do you pick the side? Okay, and how do you know where you're going to be able to articulate the best? Why did we brainstorm both sides instead of just one or the other? Yeah, exactly, Jane. It doesn't matter what you personally believe in life at all. What matters is which side you have the best, most specific examples. And I'll tell you, in my experience, it's easier to write an essay on the side you in real life disagree with. Not always, but oftentimes, because when you agree with something, you internalize it and you expect that everyone else agrees with you. So sometimes it's hard to explain your position because you assume too much. You assume everyone else is going to think the same thing, so you don't explain it as well. Sometimes it's easier to explain something that you might actually in real life disagree with. But the point is, you want to pick the one that you have the most specific, relevant examples for and run with it. And run with it. In this case, I think we've got good ones for both sides, but whichever one you're going to be able to write the clearest about. Point being is, the people that read these essays spend somewhere between a minute and 2 minutes per essay. They don't spend a lot of time reading them. And if they're not going to spend a lot of time reading them, then we really, really, really need to be super clear in what we say, because they're not going to spend enough time to understand them if we're not clear. If we're not very clear, if we're too subtle, if we're too complicated, then they're just going to assume we didn't know what we were talking about. So go for newspaper writing, where you make it super obvious exactly what you're saying. That doesn't mean write like a 6-year-old, but it means be very clear, be very cogent, make sure that it's crystal clear what side you're taking and why your examples support it. So basically the essay should look something like this. You have an intro, you tell them what the issue is, you establish your take, whether you agree or disagree about it. Each body paragraph should be its own point, its own example. And that example should be the example itself, the reason why the example is relevant, and maybe a little bit more connecting that example back to your main point, to your take. And then after you've got 2 or 3 of those written, then we've got a conclusion where you just basically take the intro and rewrite it. What's really important here is that you don't let yourself run out of time before you write the conclusion. You're much better off if you're going to only get to 4 paragraphs. You're much better off with 1 intro, of course, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion than an intro, 3 body paragraphs, ran out of time. You've got to have a conclusion. So what I often do, because it's on the computer and I can cut and paste, I'll write the intro first, I'll take the intro and I'll rewrite it to make the conclusion, and then I'll fill in the details in the middle. And what that means is if I run out of time, where I'm running out of time is on my 3rd example paragraph, but at least I've got the core of a solid essay. Style points, try to vary things up a little bit, mix of different sentence structures, but make sure that you know what you're doing. Don't try to make things complicated just to sound intelligent. Vary it up. Don't be monotone, but don't write anything unless you're 100% sure that you've got the grammar right. Same thing on vocabulary. Try to use relatively high-level vocabulary, but don't use any words that you're not 100% sure of. Right? Nothing's worse than using a word incorrectly and sounding like a real idiot to the reader. And finally, length is pretty correlated. You're better off with a decent long essay than a great short essay. Now, if you write just crap, then long doesn't really help. But as long as you're writing at a decent enough level, longer is better. So just start writing and go until you run out of time, and ideally leave yourself a minute to just quickly skim it and make sure you didn't say anything too crazy. Couple of final points to make. Getting ideas, current events is great. So just keep up to date with that. Doesn't really matter where you get it. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, those sorts of, The Economist. Depending on what you studied, you might be able to use stuff that you used in college. Especially history is great, but there's a lot of other things that are good as well. And any kind of the outside reading you're doing. I mean, sometimes it's really cool to be able to bring up something that was in Freakonomics. I don't know if you guys read that, or something that Malcolm Gladwell said. Sometimes that's cool if you can work that kind of pop academic, I should say, stuff into the essay, because it's all readily accessible. It's not too academic, but it also is pretty intelligent stuff. That doesn't mean you have to do that, but definitely take a look at it. And other places to get this, right, all the stuff that we said to read to improve your reading skills and vocabulary, that still applies here as well. All right, how to practice. Definitely take a look in the book. There's sample essays. There's scoring of the sample essays. That's great. It'll give you some confidence that you're going to be able to get a great score on this, because even their essays aren't all that great, and yet they give them pretty good scores, and you get a good feel for the kind of tone and language and level that they're looking for a good essay. They give you a list of all the possible topics. Don't waste a month trying to memorize all of them, but definitely browse them and get a feel for both the style of the topics and also the 6 different tasks that they might give you. And final point, complete the sample essay and turn it into me or Liz, in the next week or so. Now, this is kind of overdoing it. I'm going to erase this. I don't care if you guys give me an essay today, tomorrow, or even if it's 2 or 3 weeks, I'll still accept it. But the reason why this offer good for 1 week only is there is to try to encourage people to actually do it. So we want you to do it right now. We want you to do it as a part of this week's homework, but I'll just let you in on the secret that Liz and I are nice, and if you finish it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks instead of 1 week, we will happily take a look at it. And beyond that, don't stress the essays out too much. We spent half an hour talking about them. We'll spend another half an hour talking about the argument essay, and I think that's about what they deserve. 1/27th of this course devoted to the essays. Just important enough to talk about, so we don't do anything dumb. Not important enough to do anything more, though. All right, questions at all? All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and switch over to math here. Let's take a short break before we do that, though. So we'll go 5 minutes like normal, and then when we're back, grab some pencil and some paper and put your math brains, flip the switch in your brain from verbal to math, because we're going to do some cool math stuff. So here we go, 5 minutes, and we'll get started.
All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. We're going to get going on word translations or word problems. We don't have a ton of time with this, but we've been good at math before, so I'm going to say up front that the real secret to doing these problems well is translating the words into math. And if you take your time and translate, you'll find that these are not particularly difficult problems. They are problems of the type that you could have solved in Algebra 1. And depending on how things go, I may hop around. We're going to try a bunch of the different typical types of problems. All right, so let's just start off with a pretty standard one. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the timer. Grab your pen and paper or your pencil and paper and try this one. I don't have a lot of answers in, so let's go through this one together. Okay, at a market, all apples have one price and all pears have one price. We're going to figure out where we got stuck. I'm just going to model the process. So what does that tell me? I read this, and it tells me apples have one price and pears have one price. What do you think then? I think, you know, prices. A for apples. Yeah, A and P are constants. So prices. A, P. And that's apples and pears. And I just use the first letter to make it easy to remember. X and Y would be more complicated than necessary. Okay, so they're constants. And then you've got this sentence. Jean buys 4 apples and 4 pears for $3.20. So what does that tell you? How do you translate that? Just directly into math. Not A plus P equals 320, Catherine. Look again. Yeah, 4A plus 4P. Okay, well, you know, equals 320. No worries. We're just looking at exactly how to do it. Okay, so now George buys 6 apples and 2 pears for $2.40. So what's that one? Yeah, 6A plus 2P equals 240. Okay, now, what do we have here? I look at this and I get all excited. All right, because I could solve for A and P, but what am I asked to solve for? What am I asked to solve for? Before you actually do the work, you have to figure out what you're being asked to solve for. Yeah, I want A minus P, so I'm going to write that out. Okay, so encircle it so I don't solve for the wrong thing, which I could easily do. All right, so I want A minus, how much more does an apple cost than a pear? I want that. We're going to box that. Okay, so how could we solve? How could we solve? Anybody see a technique that we could use? You don't need to solve. Subtraction, yeah, sure. Okay. What I could do is just subtract. Yeah. Or I could do substitution, either way, but I actually think the subtraction is going to be faster. All right, so then I get negative 2A, all right, 4P minus 2P, so that's plus 2P equals 0.320 minus 440, that's going to leave me with 80 cents, right? Now what? Now what do I do? How much more does an apple cost than a pear? Wait a second, I made a mistake in writing that out, didn't I? Look at this. How much more than an apple does a pear cost? Which one costs more according to this language? Anybody see it? We made a little mistake. A pear costs more, yeah. So we need to get pear minus apple. Okay? That happens. We make little mistakes. We figure it out. All right? Now, once I saw this, what should I do? All right, and I noticed my mistake because I looked at this and I said, wait a second, I'm going to end up with pear minus apple. What should I do to this equation? What can I do to be able to get to p minus a? Yeah, I can just divide it by 2. If I divide both sides by 2, and that's fine. You know, this is, again, the golden rule of equations. What I do to one side, I do to the other. Okay, and then I'm fine. So then I end up with pear minus apple equals 0.40. And I have my answer, which is C. Now, what went wrong with that one? Where was the problem? Was it in translating the math or setting the goal? What happened? We all got it wrong. Forgot to divide by 2? Okay. So you picked D. All right. So that's what happened to Emma. Jane, Catherine, what went wrong? This is really valuable. We know this from before working on math, to figure out what went wrong, because any error that you can identify, you can correct. Okay. You multiplied the second equation by 2 to eliminate the p. Aha. And then you went on to solve for a, and then solve for p, and tried to substitute, which should work. It's just going to take longer. But it would work. Now, had you clearly identified the goal up front that you wanted the difference? Yeah, okay. So substitution for each can be done, but takes longer. All right, so it took too long. You were just chugging along and didn't get there. Now, who wrote this? Oh, I'm looking for P minus A. Who wrote this? Smile. Put up a smiley if you wrote this so you knew what you were looking for. No one is smiling at me. Okay, so this is an issue. All right, you always want to identify what you're solving for because it'll give you a hint. If you're solving for P minus A, then you might say, oh, is there going to be some faster way than solving for P and solving for A? Okay, that's what motivated me to think, oh, subtract. All right, so if that was your mistake, if you didn't see that and then went down the substitution trail, which would work, all right, you absolutely could do substitution. It would just take you a little longer. Remind yourself to write down the goal at the beginning of the problem. Okay? All right. Smile if you're comfortable now. I'd like to move on, try something else. Okay, message. All right, everybody's smiling. Okay. So let's take a look next. Another common, this is a standard translation problem, all right? And the difficulty here is just about translating it to equations, figuring out what you want, and then it's just elimination or substitution. Our next problem is a rate problem. And with a rate problem, you have to think about what it's actually saying. And I will tell you that a picture can be very, very helpful if you find it confusing to figure out what the problem is actually saying. A picture is some kind of chart where you take notes and think about the fundamental rate equation. What's the fundamental rate equation? Who knows the rate equation? Anybody know it? I learned it as dirt. Distance equals rate times time. Anybody learn dirt? Yeah, exactly. Dirt and then worked. There's a related equation, the work equation. Work equals rate times time, or WART, as my high school math class liked to describe it. Okay, so these are your fundamental equations. These are the things you're going to think about, and I find that the hardest part with these problems is often figuring out, people get confused between rate and time. So don't let yourself get confused. Write out a little chart, okay, or draw a picture so you can really see what's what with these problems. All right, let's try this one. Okay, now let's look at this and let's think it out, okay? Again, it's just translating to math using that, in this case, the dirt equation. A car traveling at a constant rate travels 40 miles in 0.5 hours. What does that tell us? Type away. What does that tell us? First thing, yeah, I know the distance and the time, so if I have I have a little table here to sort of track what they've told me. Distance equals the rate times the time. Okay, so I know 40 miles in 0.5 hours. So what's my rate? What's my rate have to be? Yeah, it's 80 miles per hour. Okay, good. All right. So the car then decreases its speed by 25%. What does this mean, decrease the speed by 25%? Speed is not the time, speed is the rate. So what happens? What's the new rate? 0.75 times r, yeah. Or you could think about it as 3/4 of r. Use a fraction. Either way, it's going to be 60 miles per hour. Okay, and we want it to go 90 miles. All right, so what's our time? What's our time have to be? Yeah, thank you, Catherine, 1.5. Okay, now, not everyone got that. What happened? What happened if you didn't get it? Think and let's do some analysis. What went wrong? Ah, Jane, okay, so you accidentally did 25R instead of 75R. Okay, so that's really a reading issue. Decrease its speed by 25%, slow down, and, you know, don't call it stupid, all right? That's not particularly kind. It's not kind to yourself, and it's not helpful, all right? What you want to take away from this is what should you be doing differently. Slow down and read words more carefully in the translation. Because notice that they had a choice designed to catch someone doing 0.25R. All right, they know that, I mean, the wrong answers aren't random, all right? They're trying to catch you, okay? So what we learned from this is, aha, okay, you got to be super careful of wording. We had the same issue sort of with the last problem. How much more than an apple does a pear cost at the market? You have to be so careful that you caught what they meant. Decrease its speed by 25%. Oh, that's different than the new speed is 25%. All right, and this is a really important takeaway. I find that when I do these problems, most of my time goes into translation. Probably 2/3 to 3/4 of my time, I just translate, because the actual math looking at this is trivial, right? This is very easy, okay, if you get the correct information down, all right? And yet, these are some of the toughest problems on the test. They trap a lot of people, and they trap a lot of people with the translation. Okay, let's try another one. I have another, you know, I have a set. I have a cute QC set, and you just have to notice really carefully exactly what the problems say. So let's try that, all right, and translate. Try these, and we'll take 2 minutes and 30 for both of them. All right, let's put up answers to the first problem. What's the answer to the first problem? Let's get those answers posted. Okay, all right, I see 2 D's and a B. Now, in terms of writing it out, okay, what equation do we use here? Yuko can run X miles in 2 hours and do Y crunches in 10 minutes. How do you translate that? Just quickly do it. Work, remember, is rate times time. Okay. So what do we have? Come on, anybody, type it in. For the running, we have X is what? Okay. All right, the distance of the work is F, absolutely. Or either way, it's really the same. And the time is 2 hours. We don't know the rate. Okay. Okay, so we'll leave that blank. X is something times 2. Okay. And then to make Y comparable, what do we have there? Y equals, I'll call it thing 2. Thing 1 and thing 2, just like in the cat in the hat. Okay. Rate 2. And then how do I deal with that 10 minutes? Yeah, it's just 1/6. Okay. So if we are trying to solve here the number of miles that Yuko can run in an hour, all right, can we solve for that versus the number of crunches that she can do in an hour? Yeah, we have X over 2, absolutely. Catherine's got it. But what about the number of crunches that she can do in an hour? 6Y. So we're comparing X over 2 to 6Y. Do we know which is greater? No, we really don't. We're comparing X over 2 to 6Y, and we don't know anything about X or Y. Other than that work is positive, some work is done, but we don't know, so the answer has to be D. Okay. Everybody see that? All right, so if you got it wrong, think about why. What happened? And how could you have not gotten it wrong? For future reference. All right, Catherine, I see you're typing. I want to hear what you, or see what you have to say. And you're welcome to grab the mic, by the way. If anyone wants to talk instead of type, you didn't think about the concept. Just put up, okay, yeah, good observation. Now, especially these QC problems, they are conceptual. Okay, and remember, this whole thing, I always look at these and I think, well, unless I can solve, the answer is going to be D. So let's see, can I solve? I could have plugged in numbers as well, but then I'd be trying to prove D, and it might have been faster to just see this with algebra. All right. Now, since there are just 3 of you, I want to just, if you'd rather talk than type, just put a hand up and I'll hand you the mic. All right, but I'm fine with people typing if that's more comfortable. What about this second problem? Why don't you put up your answer to the second problem? Ah, fantastic. Everybody solved it. All C's. Fantastic. What was the key here? What was the key, just quickly? I want to move this on to something more challenging, but what was the key? So we have distance equals rate times time. So we have YX. Yeah, same process as above. Okay. Yeah, I think just writing it out. Okay, so now we have 2x here, and then we have y over 2, and then you can see, oh, wait a second, they're going to be equal to the same distance. All right, very, very helpful just to use that equation and write things out. And draw a picture if that equation isn't enough. Now, let's move on. Let's try something a little more challenging in a rate problem. Here we go. You guys are good. Again, use your tricks. Understand it. Whoops, sorry about that. I jumped ahead without taking you guys with me. Here you go. 2 minutes. Try it out. Sorry. Now this problem had a little zinger. We're talking about 6 robots making 6 devices in 6 hours, which is enough to make your head spin, and then asking about 12 robots making 60 devices. Jane, you answered first. You got it right. How did you deal with this whole thing of 6 robots and 6 devices in 6 hours? Do you want to talk or type?
Okay, actually, right after I answered it, I started rethinking it, and I actually thought I might have gotten it wrong, so I don't know how to explain it very well. But I just actually tried to think of it more conceptually because I kind of got caught up in the 6 robots in 6 hours, or sorry, 6 robots, 6 devices in 6 hours. So I guess I was thinking then if it's a constant rate, then each robot was making 1 device in 6 hours, and then I should apply that to 12 robots. So if each robot can make, 1 device in 6 hours, I just multiplied it out.
Yeah, that's absolutely the key, to think conceptually what's going on. I've got 6 robots. So each robot is making 1 device in 1 hour, okay? So if I had 6 robots, of course I'd get 6 devices, all right? So you have to be careful with this rate. If each robot makes 1 device in 12 hours, then if I have 12 robots and I'm going to make 60 devices, okay? So if it's 60 devices, all right, I have to think, what's the rate of 12 robots? Okay. How many devices can 12 robots make in an hour? Well, they make 12 per hour, DPH, devices per hour. Okay. And then you figure out, oh, the time has got to be 5. And that's how you get to B. Okay. So you can't just mechanically plug numbers into a chart. I love what you said, Jane, when you said think about it conceptually. You have to think, what does it mean? All right, if 6 robots make 6 devices in 6 hours, that means each robot makes a device per hour. So if I have 12 robots, their rate is 12 devices per hour, just as with 6 robots. Okay. Their rate was 6 devices per hour. Okay. If I'm thinking about it that way. All right. Now, but you have to be really careful. Look at the wording of the problem. If you were thinking 1 robot makes 1 device per hour, look at it though. 6 robots make 6 devices in 6 hours. What is the real rate of 1 robot? Careful, I think we may have made a mistake there. What's the rate of 1 robot? Yeah, it takes a robot 6 hours. So we have a little problem, right? So we have to look at this again. And we have to think, whoops, wait a second. Okay, and notice that they have a little trap for you. They are out to get you. All right, so 1 robot, how long does it take? Well, it actually takes it 6. It'll take it 6 hours to make 1 device. Okay. So 6 robots, I know, could do 6 devices. All right, it's going to take them 6 hours to produce 6 devices. So their rate must be, all right, they make 6 devices in 6 hours. Their rate must be, 1 device in 6 hours. Okay, so it's one device in 6 hours. How do you translate that into devices per hour? All right, how do you translate that into devices per hour? Six robots make 6 devices in 6 hours. It takes 6 hours to get 6 devices out of them. Yeah, 1/6 of a device. Each robot makes 1/6 of a device. Okay. Whereas altogether, they can make 1 device per hour. Okay. So now I think about 12 of my robots. All right. And I need them to make 60 devices. Okay. So if 6 robots make 1 device per hour, how many per hour do 12 make? How many do 12 make? All right, this is where the problem did trick us up. Yeah, you have to be so careful about how you read it. 60 made 2 devices per hour. 12 robots can make 2 devices per hour, and then you say, oh no, wait a second, the time has to be 30. That 5 is a trap. All right, that 5 is a trap. Okay, I like the whole intuitive thinking. It made a lot of sense, but you've got to be so careful, yeah, of what the language says. All right, this is one where the math was right, okay, but it was math for the wrong language. All right, and the issue was this translation. 6 robots can make 6 devices in 6 hours, okay? So I know my work is 6 hours, and I know my time is, my work is 6 devices, and my time is 6 hours, but it's only 1 device per hour for 6 robots. All right, and that's the key here. It was just a translation error. Everybody see that, just how tricky this problem was? Because of this thing, this translation. It wasn't the math. The math was straightforward. You could be intuitive with the math. It was, what does this mean? And how do I translate that into math? Okay, now let me know. Smile if you're comfortable with this. Give me the blue Pepto-Bismol face if no, you don't see what happened here. Okay, so, all right, so key takeaways from this one, again, thinking about that translation. This is very confusing because you're so tempted to write 666 and then get 111, okay? But this is what it's actually telling you here. 6 robots, the second line, 6 robots will be able to produce 6 devices in 6 hours. You have to figure out their rate. All right. Okay. So good job. Let's try another type of problem. Okay. Thinking through this. Let's see. I've got a couple of good problems coming up. Let's try, yeah, this one. Okay. Let's try another one. We're going to do ratio problems. All right, and the key with ratios is to remember, think about fractions, think about proportions. How do you think about ratios? Okay, let's just try this one. Okay, this one was painful. No one has answered. Oh no. All right, so how can we translate the information? Does anybody have a way to start out? Anybody have a way to start out? Did anyone write out a table sort of like this? SUV, sedan, and mini? Okay, Catherine did. Okay. Yeah, so that's a great way to start. There are twice as many SUVs as sedans. Okay. So formula, but okay, so S plus, okay, so Emma, you're saying S plus 1 divided by 2S plus 3S. Okay, but let's not start with the formula. Let's start with the translation. Okay? The key is the translation. All right? So first let's just translate it. Twice as many SUVs as sedans. How could you put that in a table? Twice as many SUVs as sedans. Okay. All right. Yeah, or even you could do twice as many SUVs as sedans. You could put in 2 to 1. Just do it as a ratio table. All right. The other possibility might be to say, you know, twice as many SUVs as sedans. Sure, this could be 2S and this could be S. Okay. Yeah, okay, what Jane is saying. All right, and we're not sure of exactly what's going to be the best way. Sometimes with a ratio problem you want the algebra, but sometimes you just want a ratio. Okay. 3 times as many minivans as SUVs. What would you know there? 3 times as many minivans as SUVs. 2 ways to do it. I could put 1 to 3, right? SUVs to mini. Okay. And I could translate that into variables, right? Okay. But how else could I deal with that? If I know the ratio of SUVs to sedans is 2 to 1, and SUVs to minis is 1 to 3, and I've got, yeah, mini could become 6S, right? Either I would put this is 2 to 6, okay, so that they're the same. Or I would say, oh, okay, so I know this is 2S. Okay, I already know that. All right, so this is 6S. 2 ways to think about it. They're really the same. Okay, so maybe I'll pull them out into separate tables so nobody gets confused. Okay. I'll put this over here. We've got 2S and S. And we've got 2S and 6S. All right. So what do we know then? Which of the following is a possible number of cars on the lot? Okay. What do I know for the number of cars? What am I looking for? Okay, 2 ways to do it. Okay. You should explain your S means SUV, not sedan. Okay. All right, so if we're doing it, let's fix that. Okay, so you're saying there are twice as many SUVs as sedans. Add the variables together to get 9S. That's the key. All right. If you think about it, 2S plus S plus 6S equals 9S, which equals the total. All right. Or you could look at the final ratio. The final ratio is going to be 2 to 1 to 6. So what do we know from that? What do we know from that? Either way, either we know that we have a total of 9S cars, or we know that the final ratio is 2 to 1 to 6. What has to be true? Catherine is saying it. It's got to be divisible by 9. Okay. So the answer is 63. All right, questions. Looking at it. Now, I only have one answer up. What happened? What happened with this? Okay, just slow. Okay, then just pull in. All right, if it just took a little time, that's fine. This type of problem often takes a little longer. Okay, because you often have to write out a chart to think about it. It isn't straight math. All right, it should let you still pull in. That's totally fine. Okay, Jane, what happened? You know what happened with, because you got it now. Same thing, just slow solving. Okay, It's totally fine. Tell you what, from now on, if it's just taking a little long, you know, these are long problems. It's fine to go 15 seconds over, 20 seconds over even, because there are other problems that are shorter. This whole thing, this process of reading and translating is quite time consuming, and that's really the key to solving these, figuring out exactly what it's saying so you can get the math down. All right, so if you need an extra 15 seconds or 20 seconds after the little bell bings, just type in a 20 or something, 15 or 20. You were hesitating because you weren't sure. Okay, Jane. Yeah, and then you figured it out and it took you a little longer. Well, practice will solve that. So the note to self is, oh, I should practice some of these, and then I'll be faster at figuring out how. All right, either technique would work here. Either works very well, the algebraic and the non-algebraic. Either's fine. Okay. All right, so speed practice I'll put down for ratios. All right. I have some more ratio problems, and I will come back to them. Let's see. We do have to get through averages and weighted averages as well today. So if we have time, I'll come back to more ratios. There are not a ton of ratio problems on the GRE, but they're enough so that you should definitely practice them. Let's do some averages and weighted averages. These are quite common, and we should definitely get a little bit of practice with these. All right, so this next problem is an average problem. Many people find it intimidating because it's hard to see exactly how to do the math from the beginning, but what I want everyone to do is translate. Take your time writing out, what do I know? Okay, I can even set the timer a little longer to make everyone a little more comfortable. Okay, because the key with these, again, is just translating slowly and meticulously. All right, here we go. Here is an average problem. Check this out. All right, now let's see. Anyone want to volunteer to solve this problem? How do you set it up? How do you translate? Do I have a volunteer? Ah, Catherine, you're volunteering. Would you like the mic? Okay. A little more detail. Oh, no mic. All right. Okay. So 45 equals X, yeah, but for X, let's think about it. Let's write that out. At A plus B, the average of 5 numbers is 45. So A plus B plus C plus D plus E, all right. I think this is what you mean. Over 5 equals 45. All right. And then for the second thing, it's saying one of the numbers is removed and the new average is 40. So we've got A plus B plus C plus D over 4. Okay. Is 40. All right. So what's useful here? What can you do with this? What can you do with this, guys? You can find the two sums, right? I can multiply, right? Yeah, 5 times 45 gives me 225, and 4 times 40 gives me 160. Okay, now I see another answer coming in. All right. Plus E, 225, and then I've got the A plus B plus C plus D equals 160. Okay, and then what do I do? Everybody has it now, so everybody must know. What do you do next? Yeah, subtract. And again, it's like a giant substitution problem. Anybody notice that? You can subtract, or you can just say, wait a second, look at this. So E plus 160 equals 225. All right, or just E equals 225 minus 160, which equals 65. All right, great. So that one was pretty straightforward. Smile if that one was pretty straightforward. Otherwise, let me know. Let's move on to a twist. All right, I've got a QC problem, and we know that QC is usually about some kind of clever twist. So I'm warning you in advance. Look at this problem. It looks super easy, but think for a moment before you click your answer. All right, try this one. We'll take our minute and 15. Find the little twist in this problem. All right, let's see those answers. Ooh. All right. Okay. Jane, you put down D, which is awesome. All right, you were not fooled. This is very tricky. Okay, so I will write this out, and it sure looks like the answer is B. Okay, and then Jane, I'd love it if you would tell us why it's not B, because you write this out, you say 2x plus 2y plus 2z over 3. Oh, this is easy, easy peasy. Oh, I just pull out a 2. This is 2 times this whole thing, x plus y plus z over 3. Why is the answer not B? Jane? It's not so much the fractions. What is it? Look at this. What stares out at you? You think, oh, yeah, sure, for sure, B is twice as much as A, so it's bigger. But what's sneaky in here? Look at the given information. Yeah, Catherine has it. X times Y times Z is greater than 0. Now, we're used to looking at this sort of thing and thinking, if it's just 2 numbers, X times Y is greater than 0, oh, they have the same sign. But here, either all are positive, or 2 are negative. Okay? So if they're all positive, then this quantity, x plus y plus z over 3, has to be positive. And then it would be B. But what if 2 were negative? What if 2 really big ones were negative? Say y and z are really big numbers. You know, maybe they're negative 100. They're both negative 100. Okay? And x is a really tiny number. Say it's 1. All right? In that case, the average is going to be negative. Okay? All right? The average is going to be negative, and A would be bigger. That's why the answer has to be B. Yeah, exactly. Questions or comments? Yeah, what happened? What happened with this one? I think this was forgot about negatives. More time to test numbers. Okay, but when you see this, you know what's really useful if you're saying more time to test numbers? Write this out. Catherine, write this out. Okay, either all are positive or 2 are negative. Okay. You did, and you still were struggling with the time? Okay. Did you have this symbolic part down to here where you said, oh, sure, if this is positive, B is greater? Okay. And then the thing is to really look at that negative case. Look at the tricky case. What if 2 are negative? Okay. And this is something where, it's a kind of a pattern. It's a trick that you recognize with time. It may take seeing it a few times to think about it or to catch it correctly. Not choosing drastic enough numbers. All right. Okay. So then you were choosing closely related numbers. The thing that would help you there is once I looked at this and I said, well, wait a second, 2 of the numbers could be negative. All right, when would 2 times the number, and this is how I use my knowledge of how the GRE tries to trick us. When would 2 times the number be less than the number? Oh, when it's negative. Can I make this whole quantity negative? All right, so you really want to think before you check numbers, and you'll have to check far fewer numbers because you'll know, oh, I need to pick drastic numbers to make the whole quantity negative. That's the secret there. To be thinking here, oh, how could I reverse it? I know what the obvious direction is. How could I reverse it? All right? We want to become good, not just at testing, but also at seeing, what they're trying to get at, how they're tricking us here. Does that make sense? That whole thing? This is a real skill to develop, and when you get a problem wrong or when you ran out of time with something like this, think about that. Was there something you could have thought about up front? It's a tricky test more than a hard test. All right, it's quite tricky. Okay, now I'd like to try a weighted average problem. All right, everybody's familiar with weighted averages? Smile if you know the weighted average formula. Smile if you've computed them before. You can put up a frowny face, a blue face if you've never done weighted averages. No, okay, so let's think about, I'm going to just put up a slide for weighted averages. All a weighted average is, okay, say I have a classroom, or say I have quizzes, and I'm a teacher, and I'm going to grade my students, and I have quizzes and tests. Okay, I might take the test average T and the quiz average Q and decide that, tests are going to be 70% of the grade, so I'd multiply that by 0.70. And quizzes are only going to be 30% of the grade, so I'd multiply this by 0.30, all right, to get the average. So the weighted average would be the 0.30 times quizzes plus 0.70 times tests. Rather than if I were weighting them evenly, I'd say quizzes times 0.5, plus tests times 0.5. Each would be half the grade. All right? Does that make sense? It's a weighting. Smile if that makes sense, Pepto-Bismol face, if you've never seen anything like this before. All right. Okay, so that makes sense. So now let's think about it in terms of weighting. If I have 100 people who score an average of, say, 80 on my test, and I have 2 people who score, say, an average between them of 98. Well, what's the overall average of the 102 people combined have to be close to? Where is it approximately? I have 100 people scoring 80 and 2 people scoring 98. Where is the overall average close to? It's got to be closer to the 80, okay? And that's the thing where you have to think about the weight. Your overall average in my formula here is going to be closer to your test average than to your quiz average, okay? And that's the big secret to weighted averages. All right, so I'm going to put up a QC problem. It's a weighted average. You could do a lot of work to solve, or you could think about how weighted averages work. Of course, I want you to think about how weighted averages work rather than do a lot of work to solve. I know you could pop out your calculator and do the work, okay? But there's a faster way. Try this out. Okay, so it looks like that was pretty easy for people. Nobody did the calculation, it looks like. Did anyone do the calculation? Smile at me if you found a faster way, and you can put up a hand clap if you did the calculation. All right, everybody found the fast way. Great. And the fast way is just to realize, oh, wait a second, there are 73,000 citizens in town B and only 66 in A, so the average overall has to be closer to the town B average, not to the town A average. That's fantastic. All right, let's just try one more average problem, and then I want to move on to some stats problems. Okay, let's try this. And we'll do 2 minutes for this, but again, be clever. You don't have to do a lot of work to solve this. This is mostly about thinking. Okay, very few answers up. All right, so let's vote a different way. I want you to, which of the following must be true is our issue. A bowling league has a Saturday division and a Wednesday division. The average for the Sunday division is 162, and the average score for the Wednesday night division is 186. The average for both nights is 170, okay? So which of the following must be true? Does this have to be true? Smile if it has to be true, thumbs down if no. There are more players for the Sunday night than the Wednesday night. All right, so everybody agrees that it has to be true, right? And that's correct. That's our average thing. You look at it and you say, oh, wait a second. Average for both nights is 170. 170 is closer to 162 than 186, so there must be more people on Sunday. Now, what about B? The median for both nights combined is 170. Make a face or thumbs down. Okay. All right, so 2 people, Jane and Catherine, are saying this cannot be true. Why doesn't this have to be true? What is the median? Anybody know what the median is? What's the median? The median is the middle term, okay? It's the middle number. Now, if we know the average of a set, do we know what the middle term is? Do we know? We don't know exactly, Emma. So this we don't necessarily know exactly. 2 sets could have the same average but a very different middle term, right? Something could be lopsided. Okay, now we have this thing. The range of scores is 24. Smile if you think it has to be true, thumbs down, or the Pepto-Bismol face if no. All right, 2 Pepto-Bismol faces from Jane and Catherine. Okay, now, am I not sure? What is the range? If you're not sure, think to the definition. What is the range? What is the range? Okay. It's the largest score minus the smallest score. Okay, now this one's for, yeah, Catherine also has it. Everybody knows it. Okay, so Emma, if you know the average, bowling scores it's summed up. It's just summed up. If you know the average score, do you know the range? Do you necessarily know the range? Nope. Okay. So the whole point of this problem, the GRE giving you something like this, is to test, do you understand that there's a reason why we're given different statistics? You know, when you're given data, you're given the average, you know, the mean, which is just the average, the median, the range, and you might also be given the standard deviation. You can't get one from the other. They're all ways of describing a data set. Okay, so the big thing to take away here is just because you know one of them doesn't mean that you know the others. All right. We are going to continue, Ian tells me, with statistics next week and do more of these problems. So this was just our tantalizing intro to statistics. Is that correct, Ian? We're going to continue next week? All right. Yeah, we're a little low on time, so we want to go through this. GRE does test stats. Stats are very important in grad school because you have to look at data and you have to know what it means, mean, median, range, and standard deviation. So they do test it somewhat more than many other standardized tests. And we will go through it in detail next week. All right, Ian, here's the mic back.
All right, guys. Well, I think we're just going to call today here. I think we got a lot done today, actually, with reading top and with the number properties. The word problems. But just as Liz said, we'll pick up where we left off with stats next week, and then we'll also do a little bit of permutations, combinations, and probability. So I highly recommend that if you guys get no other homework done this week, you do the math reading, because that permutation, combination, probability lesson really goes more smoothly if everybody's got the basics, got the familiarity down with those concepts. But anyway, let's call it a day. As always, happy to stick around after class and answer any questions that you might have. And otherwise, we will see you guys next week.